Policy Matters. Policy Matters is a conversation platform which aims to provide reasoned analysis and content to the activities, reforms, and policies of the federal government of Ethiopia. Dr. Gedion Timothewos, Attorney General of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, thank you very much for joining me to answer a few questions in this session.
My pleasure.
Let's start with the recent parliamentary session where His Excellency the Prime Minister answered questions forwarded to it by the members of parliament, in which he reported around 113 violent incidents that were perpetrated by the TPLF junta in the past 2 years throughout the country, almost everywhere. A few cases, for example, about 37 incidents in Oromia, 23 being in Amhara, 7 in Gambela, the major ones. What is your take on that? Give us the details, or walk us through what really happened, how it happened, and the measures taken in this regard.
Right. Thanks a lot. So we have to understand this from the context, to give us a context of what has happened. It's very important to note that when the change in administration took place about 2.5 years ago, many within the TPLF top brass were not really happy about the transition and the change in administration. It meant that they were losing their privilege, they were losing the dominant position they had. And it seemed that one strategy they designed and tried to implement was days by 1,000 cuts. Right? So you instigate conflicts here and there, you incite communal clashes here and there, and through those mechanisms try to undermine the new administration. Now, when you look into many of these violent incidents, some of which were handled by regional law enforcement agencies, some of which were investigated by the Federal Police and the Federal Attorney General's Office, what you see is a pattern in which violent actors, militant groups, extremist elements in various regional states are either directly given assignments, missions by the top brass of the TPLF to carry out attacks against minorities in various parts of the country, or they are indirectly supported through their media outlets, through their political mentorship and support. So, for example, if you look at some of the incidents that occurred in the special zone of the Amara regional state, where there are special zones in which Oromo special zones in the Amara regional state, some of the militant elements operating in that zone, they flew to Mekelle, they were given instructions, they were given weapons to support their militant and violent activities in that regional state. You see also similar patterns that have occurred in Benishangul Gumuz regional state, where these militant elements, violent groups, get direct material support in terms of weaponry, financial assistance, and also political and moral support from the TPLF. There are also, you also notice indirect support in the form of, the TPLF has a very had a very extensive social media and mainstream media presence and network, and this media infrastructure was providing support, providing coverage to these groups. So all in all, the pattern you see is based on some of the investigations that have been undertaken at the federal level, as well as investigations carried out at regional levels. The intention seems to have been that by instigating, sponsoring, and inciting communal clashes, violent incidents, to undermine the transition, to undermine the reform process, to make sure that people will withdraw their support from the reform and the reformist administration. So these are the kind of this is the kind of involvement TPLF had in many of these violent incidents.
Say that it's not just random acts of violence here and there. We know that they are popping everywhere. You look at something somewhere, and suddenly when you appease that, and there's something else somewhere else in the form of violence, and deadly violence actually. So can we say it's a systematic, well-structured?
It was not a spontaneous or random thing. A very good example would be what happened in the border between the Somali regional state and the Oromia regional state, the conflicts that occurred that were orchestrated in these regional states. The people of these two regional states have coexisted for at least 4 centuries, if not for longer. Culturally, linguistically, and in many other respects, there is a great deal of affinity between these two groups. They have peacefully coexisted together for as far as we can remember, and the affinity is to such an extent that you can hardly tell them apart, particularly in the border areas. All of a sudden, when the transition occurred, a massive conflict seemed to flare up out of nowhere, and our investigation has revealed the involvement of the former officials of the regional state, in the Somali regional state, in instigating this conflict, in perpetrating attacks against various ethnic groups. You can see that this was not organic. This was not a genuine communal conflict, because as soon as those elements were removed from that regional state, the peace that the regional state had known beforehand was restored. The coexistence continued. You don't see any reprisal attacks. Things are back to normal. The friendly, brotherly relationship between the people of those regional states has continued. There were militant groups, armed groups, informal organizations that were deliberately trained, organized, and financed. Right? So this doesn't happen in a vacuum. If there is an organization, if there is financing, if assignments and missions are being given, it tells you that this is something that has been orchestrated, that has been premeditated. So it is, you see a pattern. These are conflicts that have been systematically orchestrated. The sheer number of the conflicts, the fact that they occurred in places where normally these kind of incidents do not occur. The fact that immediately, as soon as the incident occurs, it gets this extensive media coverage, particularly from the side of the TPLF. It's all indicative of the fact that this was designed, deliberate, and premeditated.
So what measures have been taken to avert those incidents? Because there was a widespread outcry, widespread complaint and claim by different parts of society and some groups, why the government was not taking the proper measures. So at the conclusion of your investigation, the investigations you just referred to, what measures did the government take?
So the measures we have taken are the individuals were directly involved in instigating and directing these conflicts. Some of them very high-ranking state officials, including, for example, the president or the head of the regional state in Somalia, and other officials, collaborators as well. They were apprehended and they have been brought to justice. And they had their day in court, and those matters are being, these were massive crimes. There are a number of witnesses, the number of victims is quite large as well. So it has taken some time, but it's going through the judicial process. And in some of these incidents, there have already been sentences, convictions. In some of the cases, the prosecutors have established their cases, and the court is giving the accused a chance to defend themselves. In some of the cases, there has been convictions, only sentencing remains. In some cases, there have also been suspects who have been convicted and who have been sentenced. So in all these cases, the government's policy has been to ensure that there will not be impunity, to ensure that those who are responsible for this kind of conflict, for this kind of violence, will be held accountable. Now, I must point out that in the wake of the transition, the TPLF had some sort of control and influence in the security apparatus, and that shadow it cast had constrained the capability of the government in terms of effectively responding to these incidents and averting the violence. However, thanks to the reform measures that were being taken, focusing on law enforcement, the military, and the security apparatus, increasingly the government's ability to respond to these kind of incidents and to avert them is being strengthened.
I'll come back to that in a moment. But in terms of the perpetrators apprehended in connection with all those incidents, part of the claim has been the speed at which the justice system is responding or handling those cases. How expedient do you think it's been in terms of bringing those to justice?
I would have to consider that it's not as speedy as we'd like it to be, but we also have to take into account a number of factors. One, it's the sheer number of cases is overwhelming to the judicial system. And two, to give final decision in this kind of matters, there has to be due process. We bring the charge, but it's not as if that the judge will look at the charge we have brought and say, okay, then we sentence them. The defense will object. There will be back and forth preliminary pre-trial back and forth between the defense and the prosecutor's office. Then once the actual trial begins, each and every witness, each and every testimony has to be heard. There will be cross-examination. All of this takes time. All of this takes, the judge would have to digest the testimony, the evidence that has been brought before them. And when you take into account the number of incidents that have taken place over the last 2 years, it takes time. And but in most of the cases, we are reaching the finish line. In some, there have been convictions and sentencing in somewhere near to the to conviction, but all in all, it has not been as experienced as would have liked it to be. But the good thing is, in the last 2 months, a number of judges have been appointed by new judges have come to the bench. So the judiciary will have more personnel to entertain these cases. In some of the cases, there have been circuit courts that have been entertaining the matter. So, for example, when incidents occurred in the Benishangul Gumuz regional state, in the southern regional state, the judges were entertaining these cases, were traveling from Addis as circuit judge, going to Asosa, going to Hawassa to entertain the cases. So this has also had its toll as far as the speed is concerned. But now the judiciary is establishing permanent bench in these regional states as well. So that will expedite the process.
Obviously, the overwhelming nature of the incident could actually test the capacity of the justice system. But let me take you back to what you alluded to earlier in terms of government capacity. It was a widespread claim that the government was unable to ensure the rule of law at the time due to lack of capacity, all those claims coming from the different corners. What's your take on that?
My take is that there is always room for improvement. You could always strengthen capacity and enhance your capability. Anyone who says that our capability is optimal and there is no room for improvement will be fooling himself or herself. While we are continuously striving to strengthen and enhance our capability, I would say that the fact that we have been able to bring thousands of suspects in relation to these conflicts, to identify, to investigate, identify and apprehend not just a few hundreds, but a couple of thousands of suspects, and the fact that we have been able to process them through the judicial machinery, the fact that they are having their day in court and they are being held accountable, some of them being acquitted, some being convicted, I think that is a testament to the capability of the state and the long history and tradition of the Ethiopian statehood. These number of cases in many other parts of the world, in many third world countries, it would have been handled by some specialized international tribunal that would require, that would have a huge budget, which will be more cumbersome, which would be more time-taking, and which would not ensure accountability to the extent that we have been able to ensure accountability. In these kind of mechanisms, they take years, and the result has been less than satisfactory. In our case, we are talking about a matter of a year and a half for most of the cases, maximum 2 years. So I would say that these have shown the resilience of the Ethiopian state and the increasing capability of our institutions.
The amount of resources it takes to handle all these cases, these massive cases, is obviously immense. And speaking of that, also let's look at the overall social, political and economic impacts of those incidents throughout the country.
The overall political, social and economic impact of this incident is it's something worth looking into, and I'm very glad that you raised this question. So to start with the economic impact, In just one of the incidents that has occurred in one of the regional states, the destruction of property has been to the tune of almost 4 billion. So many businesses were burned down, they're ransacked, private property was destroyed, burned down. This is, and you'd have to look into the number of people who were employed and who are their livelihood in these businesses, in these enterprises. The impact this will have on investment and economic activity and enterprise. It has been quite significant. So the economic impact, it's not just, it goes far beyond the figure we indicate in the charts we bring. In the charts we bring, we would just tally up what has been burned down, what has been destroyed, what has been taken, and say this is the damage. But in terms of lost employment, lost livelihood, and investment that we might have lost as a result of this conflict, the economic impact, I would say, has been quite significant. The insecurity this has created, the wound it has created, the families that have been broken, people who lost their mothers, fathers, a family member as a result of these incidents, and their pain and suffering is quite enormous. It's something that you can't easily express, or it's not something that you could quantify. Despite this, what I find very encouraging is people whose properties have been burned down, you see them rebuild, and you see the assistance and support they receive from their neighbors, from the community, and that the ability of the communities in all these places to overcome these harrowing incidents, this violence, and trying to rebuild, it shows you that this is alien to the community. This is something that the conflict, the hatred, it's something that others are trying to inject from outside. This is not something that the community embraces. So both in the economic, social front, the resilience of communities all over the country and their determination to rebuild their social bonds, to rebuild the businesses that have been burned down, the houses that have been burned down, that I find very encouraging. It restores faith in humanity. It builds your confidence on the willingness and determination of Ethiopians to not to let these kind of elements determine their destiny.
They're quite promising, actually.
Yes.
But also the political narrative, it's also one major factor that incited all these violence. In terms of political impact, what have we seen in these past weeks or even months in the form of our political space being probably more democratic? Have we seen any change, improvement in this regard? Have the incidents caused any damage to it, further damage to it? What's your take?
I would say that whenever you have this kind of conflicts and violence, it prioritizes security. Security becomes for the public at large, for the government as well. Security becomes the overriding and first order priority. And in that sense, the kind of attention you would have given to political reforms and opening up the political space, it might, for a while, detract from that priority. So it might, I would say that in one way or another, these incidents have hampered the transition. Their intention has been not only to derail it, but to permanently bring an end to it.
So what is now being done? Coming to my last question in the form of conclusion. What's being done at the moment to maintain rule of law and ensure stability in the country?
Let me continue from where, yes, there has been attempts to derail the transition, the political reform, and to, in effect, to bring about the disintegration of the Ethiopian state, to bring its days through thousand cuts. But the institutions have proved to be more resilient, more capable than our detractors had anticipated. And two, even as far as the political reform is concerned, amidst all this destruction and effort to derail the reform, I would say that we have pressed on with the reforms. We have just recently adopted a new media proclamation that is part of the reform package. New media policy has been adopted. The conversation about the election is becoming center stage. Opposition political parties that are no opportunity, there are no space to operate in the Tigray regional state. A number of opposition parties are now part of a coalition that is administering the regional state. So in all these fronts, you see progress, you see more opportunity, more freedom to engage proactively, positively in the political space. So what is being done to ensure rule of law is we're continuing with the reform initiatives we have started with. We are doubling down these reform initiatives. We are aimed at strengthening institutions, ensuring that citizens will enjoy their constitutional freedoms within an institutional and normative framework that ensures both security and liberty. So there is no turning back. Both the public at large and the government are not saying that, oh, now our concern is only security, so let's forget about liberty and freedom. So we are continuing with renewed vigor and focus. We are continuing with the reform process. I think the upcoming election would be the capstone of that reform process. And I would say that through this process, we'll continue to build an Ethiopia where there is rule of law, and on the basis of rule of law, there is liberty, fraternity, and equality.
Let's finish with that. Dr. Gedion Timothewos, Attorney General of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. Thank you very much for taking the time to sit and have this interview with me.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Policy Matters